views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Small businesses may be the lifeblood of America, but the question is, where do minority businesses and contractors stand in the midst of this pandemic? That's a conversation we'll have and a whole lot more on this edition of Perspectives with yours truly, Daren Jaime.
What's on your mind? Express what's on your mind. What's on your mind?
Anything relevant to life, you bring it to the table. Whether you make a move solo or a movement with a stable. No fables, you speak on your decisions. Cause in the long run, it's your voice, your views, your vision. Keeping it real with many messages for you to know. This ain't radio, but DJ runs the show. Entertainment, he rocks it. Politics, he locks it. The host with the most would handle any topic. Don't forget to share your perspective with shines of light. Cause it might make a difference in someone else's life.
Make a difference in someone's life. Express what's in your heart and your mind. Share your perspective.
What's your perspective? Let them know.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Perspectives. I am Daren Jaime. Of course, we thank you for joining us. As always, you can watch Perspectives right here on BronxNet Channel 67. We invite you to stay connected to us also on our social media platforms at BronxNet TV. My personal social media, of course, professional page, Daren C. Jaime. You can find that on Facebook and then also on Twitter and Instagram, DC Jaime23. There you can also get some information as well as possibly even some inspiration. Straight ahead on today's show, we talk about the issue of small business and how it affects the minority community. Well, Congress recently passed the American Rescue Plan Act, more popularly known as the COVID-19 stimulus package. It's a $1.9 trillion economic stimulus bill, including funds for PPP or the Paycheck Protection Program. But with all of that, many small businesses, and especially minority-owned, are still struggling to keep their doors open and their staff employed. With city and state reopening restrictions, there are many unique challenges that these business owners are still facing. And joining me now to share a little bit more and to talk is someone who really is working to help those businesses overcome some of these challenges. He is the co-managing director of Minority and Women Contractors and Developers Association. We welcome back to the show, Kenneth Thomas. And Kenneth, good to have you back.
Good to be back. It's been a few years, so definitely looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, and I mean, when you think about it, it's been a few years, and a whole lot has happened in a few years. We talked in the whole lead about this pandemic, and more specifically, how really small businesses and minority businesses are faring. From your estimation, give us a little estimate as to how you see small business, particularly minority businesses, being able to deal amidst this pandemic.
So it's actually interesting. So our organization conducted a survey during the height of the pandemic. So this was around May and June of last year to really try to develop a comprehensive assessment of the impact and the fallout of the pandemic having on their businesses. And 40% of our members stated that they didn't envision being in business by the end of 2020. And so thankfully, the economy turned around much faster than we all anticipated. So most of those businesses are, again, thankfully still in business. And primarily the issue is capacity, right? And I think that's why our organization focuses both on advocacy for MWBE contractors and capacity. So when the pandemic hit, it impacted most detrimentally the companies, and typically these are smaller businesses, especially minority-owned small businesses, worse because they didn't have the capacity. And this really focuses on the financial capacity, the administrative capacity to navigate the loops and turns when it came to how the pandemic impacted small businesses and the economy. And this is especially poignant in the construction.
We're going to take a quick break and be back with more with Kenneth. A little technical difficulty. We'll be right back right here on Perspectives. Well, we're back here on Perspectives. Daren Jaime here with you. We have got our technical difficulties together. This is what happens when you do shows virtually, right? There are internet challenges, and some of those things just can't be avoided. But we got Kenneth back. And Kenneth, let's go right back at it. And so you were talking a little bit about the challenges, particularly minority-owned businesses are facing during this time.
Yes. So look, the challenges primarily center around capacity or the lack thereof. And we conducted a survey last year of our members. And again, our organization consists of an association of certified MWBE construction contractors and some that moonlight as small developers. And so we wanted to really cultivate a comprehensive assessment of how the pandemic and really the fallout from the pandemic, especially during the height of it. So this was in April, May, and June, how it impacted their business models. And 40% of our members stated that they didn't think that they would be in business by the end of 2020. And thankfully, the economy made a much faster turnaround than we all anticipated. And so the vast majority of those companies are still in business to this day. But 90% of our companies were detrimentally impacted by the fallout from the pandemic. And a lot of it is attributed to, again, just the lack of capacity and capacity constraints associated with being small minority-owned businesses, especially in the construction industry, which again tends to be more heavily regulated than other industries and tends to need more capital than other industries in terms of funding payroll and paying suppliers and again navigating insurance and bonding, et cetera. So these are the myriad challenges that many of our members have to contend with. And unfortunately, the fallout most impacted them. And I think this is by and large really a macroeconomic issue because you can really assess the economy at large. Most of the larger institutional corporates were able to be profitable, be more profitable. You look at an Amazon.com, like they were kind of custom made to really profit and benefit from an economy in a state that it was in.
Right. But when you look also at small businesses, one of the other challenges is making this adaptation to have to deal with having PPP supplies. PPE supplies, there's difference between PPP and PPE supplies, and making sure that they're really adequate and ready. And it's bad enough that you have to take this cut. And as I talk to business owners, they're like, we can't afford this.
Well, so one benefit of working or being operating within the construction industry is that the PPE supplies were already accessible and already part and parcel of business operations because you might have silicate in the air during construction. So it was already essentially a requirement on most major construction projects. So that was less of an issue. But just to really segue, accessing PPP loans was a big issue because, again, a lot of our members and really MWBEs at large don't have the institutional relationships with banking partners. And that therein lied the problem, especially during the first round of the PPP disbursements. If you didn't have a relationship with a Wells Fargo or Bank of America or Chase, it was really difficult to access PPP disbursements to keep your business afloat. And that was a tremendous kind of existential challenge that many of our members had to contend with and many MWBEs in general had to contend with.
Yeah. Share with us a little bit about the work that you're doing right now with your business.
Yeah. So again, our organization focuses on capacity building, and it is something of an unpopular notion to advance because the low-hanging fruit really in this space is advocacy and MWBEs. So capacity building really is about ensuring that MWBE contractors operating in the construction industry have the financial wherewithal, the administrative and operational tools really to navigate a really complex and heavily regulated industry.
Coming up after the break, we're going to talk more with Kenneth, talk about what exactly the small businesses need in order to thrive in this society. We'll talk about that when we return right here on Perspectives. we're back here with Kenneth Thomas. He's the co-managing director of the Minority and Women Contractors and Developers Association, and we're glad to have him sharing with us here on Perspectives. And been a little while, but we got him back, and we're back in flow and having the conversation. Before the break, talk a little bit about what is it that small businesses actually need in order to survive, particularly minority businesses. So much attention has been given to others. But when we talk about minority businesses, there are some very specific needs. So take it away.
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, I'd caution anyone to not look at minority-owned businesses as kind of monolithic enterprises that have the same issues. So specific to the construction industry, again, construction industry tends to be more heavily regulated and has higher capital constraints in terms of being able to access those markets as an entrepreneur. So from our perspective as an organization, we're actually in the midst of launching an incubator program to assess those needs. And again, those needs tend to be existential needs for minority-owned contractors in this space, tend to be access to short-term loans. And that could be in the vein of, a 30 to 60, 90-day loan, or it could be access to line of credits. And this ties into the issues and challenges of accessing PPP loans, is that if you don't have the kind of administrative, operational, financial wherewithal to navigate a lot of these impediments, it can be really difficult to develop and cultivate an institutional relationship with a banking partner so that in times of need, you can tap into those funds. So again, you can kind of fund your payroll and pay your suppliers. So from our perspective as an organization, it's really being the linchpin between the financial enterprises, the banks and the CDFIs and the private equity firms that at the very least are nominally receptive to extending credit to MWBEs, but it's also helping our MWBEs become more financially sophisticated. And I can tell you a really short anecdote. A few years ago, I had a conversation with an MBE carpenter, and he had a carpenter firm, and I had a contract lined up for him. And I asked him, I said, look, I just need access to your financials so I can forward to the general contractor. His response was, what are financials? And that's a huge problem in the sense of not you're an entrepreneur, you have a small business, but you still don't yet have the tools to really develop your business into a more sophisticated enterprise so that you can effectively bid on these projects and if you secure a contract, able to execute these contracts. And so that really kind of like sparked this concept of we maybe need to take a step back in terms of advancing the interests of minority-owned contractors and assess, do they have the wherewithal and the presence to really understand what the challenges are? And so for us, developing this incubator is attempting to address and mitigate those needs so that they understand the difference between a balance sheet and an income statement. And they understand when a prospective borrower is requesting these documents, they can turn over these documents. And they understand when a general contractor who is on the verge of really facilitating an opportunity via contract to work on one of their projects is requesting one of these documents, they have these documents ready, they have their insurance and their bonding, and they essentially, fundamentally, it's about capacity. They have the capacity to execute the project. Because what's happened, especially in the construction industry, is that there's a bigger push to facilitate opportunities, but there's not as much of a concerted effort to make sure that these minority-owned contractors are equipped and ready to execute these opportunities. So what ends up happening is that you have these opportunities, the minority-owned contractors are unable to execute the opportunities, and it has generated this culture of cynicism, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, here's a big question. I think we've asked this of politicians, we've asked this from the highest level all the way down. When you look on state roadways, you see construction crews. You look around New York City, you see construction crews. And a majority of the time, you will see, particularly on state highways, no people of color. And secondly, you'll see the sign, your highway taxes at work. So how do you get to a place where you're actually paying taxes and don't even see fair representation in the construction industry right there on our local highways?
Great question. And I think that that challenge intersects with workforce development. So, and I guess it might be beyond the scope of this show, but really, when you talk about workforce development, you talk about the demographic composition of active union members. That really tells you why you tend not to see as much diversity on road work projects, on public work projects, because look, the reality is that on the active union members tend to skew or tend to be less diverse. And if you really examine the contractors that are being allocated the work to manage a road work project or a public works project, 99.99 times out of 100, those aren't minority-owned contractors. And part and parcel of the problem is that, again, you can look at this $1.9 million bill that Biden supported, infrastructure bill that's in tow. It's going to generate opportunities, but if you don't have the capacity to execute those opportunities, then you won't be able to follow through on those opportunities. And so it sounds great when you say, look, we're gonna build roads and we're gonna revamp infrastructure at a federal level, and that is great in the abstract and devoid of context. But when you peel back the layers and you assess which firms will benefit from this work, it's going to be the firms that have the capacity to execute and the capacity to facilitate a $5, $10, $20 million contract, that they can front the payroll, they can pay the suppliers. And on the workforce side, look, most of this work is union, and unfortunately, the racial composition on union projects is less diverse.
It's a rough place, and it's rough times. When we talk about this diversity, seeing diversity amongst these troubled times is not commonplace. And I think that's the problem with a lot of people, that even in the times like these, there is this push to talk more about communities of color, blacks, minorities. And I want to come back after the break and find out how much has actually been shaken since we've been talking about this. A lot of people have been talking more about communities of color, race, Black Lives Matter. How's that translated in the construction industry? We'll talk about that when we return. Back here on Perspectives, we'll continue our conversation. That Kenneth, I'll bring you back in. I want to ask you about the conversation that a lot of that has happened. Social unrest. We're in the middle of a trial, the Derek Chauvin trial, and many people seeking justice and a criminal justice perspective. But what you talk about is more of an economic justice, if you will, when you talk about having diversity in the construction field. How has what's going on in the criminal justice environment impacted from your economic justice environment in the way of diversity, and really not just people doing a couple of token things, but really taking it seriously to the place that transcends into results?
Right. I think, look, this social justice wave has definitely made the narrative easier to push. I can't, from a personal perspective, in terms of running this organization along with my partner, Jason Centrone, I can't necessarily say that it's translated into kind of tangible, actionable results. But it has helped from a philosophical and narrative perspective to really talk and broach the subject of increased diversity in the construction industry, and not just workforce development, right? So it's not just about seeing more diversity on the roadworks projects, right? Seeing more Black and brown faces on those projects, but it's at a higher level, right? It's at who are the owners of the businesses that are being allocated these contracts. And I think, look, half of our organizational mission is advocacy, but advocacy is just one element. Because again, if we just focused on advocacy, if we just focused on, look, we need more opportunities, more contracts for minority-owned enterprises operating in the construction and real estate industries. That in a vacuum is great. It's an awesome perspective to take. But if you are not positioning these companies to execute these contracts, you essentially are creating the market inefficiencies that have really developed into, look, a cottage industry. Honestly, look, I'm not attempting to disparage the consultants that operate in these spaces, but we've created this cottage industry of MBE consultants that essentially exists because of these market inefficiencies. So you have various city and state and federal agencies that have these set-asides and these carve-outs for MNWBEs, but the capacity isn't there. And so when the capacity isn't there, the general contractors and the construction managers, they hire the M&WBE consultants to check off boxes and say, look, we made a quote-unquote good faith effort to facilitate these opportunities, but we couldn't find enough MWBEs. And I ran an organization of general contractors and construction managers a few years ago. So I was essentially kind of behind the veil, and I heard the conversations. Essentially, for them, it was, look, let's hire an MBE consultant, have them check off the boxes, and so we can submit this to our client to say that we made an effort, we shot some emails out. But that doesn't help with capacity. That doesn't help with, right, can you bid on this project? Can you even pre-qualify with the general contractor, with this construction manager, to even be able to build? And again, a large part of the pre-qualification process with general contractors is submitting your financials, submitting your insurance and bonding qualifications. And unfortunately, many MBEs especially don't have the wherewithal to really understand how crucial it is to have this kind of documentation, have this organizational, administrative, and financial capacity and wherewithal to even begin the process of being assessed for potential opportunities.
So when you have the right person, say for instance, I have all my information, all the financial, I've got capacity, the things that I need, I want to fill out to become a minority MWBE. How long does that process take for somebody who starts and has all their stuff to getting it across the finish line?
I'll be very candid, and I think therein lies one of the core issues on the front end, is that there are various agencies and municipalities and even large contractors that have their own MWBE certification process. So it's not a clean, coherent, cohesive, streamlined process, unfortunately. I think some in this space, including our organization, are pushing for that. But I'll give you a very kind of clear kind of example. So if you are looking to become certified, you can be certified by the city, by the state, port authority, school construction authority, by the federal government, and they all take. So the city tends to be more efficient in that process. You can be certified if you have all your documentation within a few weeks or months. The state has been and is kind of notorious for taking a really long time to get certified. It can take months, potentially a year or two, to be certified. But part of that is because their due diligence process tends to be more strenuous because of the fraud in the WBE certification space. So they tend to scrub that documentation more carefully. But it can be a confusing, confounding process if you're looking to become certified. And then once you become certified, the real issue is the efficacy of this certification. What does it get you? So and it's developed a lot of citizens. I know, look, I work with MWBEs on a daily basis. For them, they're very frustrated and cynical and saying, like, we don't get the point, we don't get the value add of being certified because opportunities that can be directly attributed to being certified are few and far between. So for us as an organization, it is about developing kind of this comprehensive and holistic framework that you can kind of tap into to leverage your MWBE status into opportunities, while on the other hand, us helping to build capacity so that when the opportunity comes to you, you are able to bid on a project effectively.
Yeah, I've often said the game has to change, right? We talk Absolutely. about MWBE, you talk about utilization. So a general contractor has to utilize a certain amount of minorities in order to be in compliance.
Right.
I want to see the game change. I want to see it where the minority has the contract and wins the contract. And then we don't have to talk about MWBE utilization, right? I mean, that would be ideally what it is. But in a situation like it is, unfortunately, it's kind of like football. You got to have the Rooney Rule because guess what? People are just not doing what they're supposed to do by giving minorities not just a fair shot, but even a fair hire. So, I mean, I feel the pain. But, we're drawing down to a close. I want to ask you a question. Do you see things getting any better? And what can people do before we close? Got about a minute left.
Yeah, I think there's incremental market kind of notable progress on this end. Again, I think it's and not to toot our own horn, but organizations like ours that tend to be more progressive, more subversive when it comes to shifting the narrative, right? So I think we've been really successful, I think, in terms of shifting the narrative where it's not just the focus on facilitating opportunities for MWBEs, but it's about capacity, capacity, capacity. Don't put the cart before the horse, right? We need to build the capacity so that they can execute these opportunities. And I think if we can continue to shift the narrative where more people are buying into that conceptually, I think therein is where we'll see significant progress on this end. And I'm kind of optimistic and encouraged that that's what's happening. We're beginning to really hold people to task, hold agencies to task, hold elected officials to task, where they're not just focusing on the low-hanging fruit, which is, oh, we have a $10 million project, we have a 30% set aside for MWBEs, and you circulate the press release, you get some photo ops, and then you kind of wipe your hands, and then you let the market determine who really gets placed on that project in terms of the businesses. So for us, it's about, no, we need the capacity as well and the opportunities. That's crucial, and I think there is progress on that end.
Yeah, capacity and opportunities. That's the real truth. We're going to leave it there, Kenneth. Thank you so much for being with us here on Perspectives. Don't take so long, brother. We got to have you back.
Absolutely. Just let me know when.
All right, Kenneth Thomas. He's a minority director of the minority co-managing director of the. I got it right? Co-managing director?
Co-managing director, yeah. I know
right,
it's a
I'll make sure I got it right. I can't even read my own handwriting. Co-managing director. And so we thank you for being with us, Kenneth, and good to have you sharing with us.
Likewise, guys. Have a good one.
All right. Well, I want to let you know, everybody, thank you for watching this edition of Perspectives. Listen, want to make sure that you are informed. And as you say, when we see people out on the street and we talk about construction, and go out there and take a look. See how many are out there working. See how many of color are out there working. Find out if somebody's a contractor. Find out if somebody's a subcontractor. Find out, because it's important. Because when we raise our voice with elected officials and the people that matter, it's important that we're armed with information. As I mentioned earlier in the show, you go out and check out what goes on, on the highways. You see your tax dollars at work, but do you see a fair representation? If you don't see a fair representation, it's an opportunity for us to raise our voice and let our voice be heard. Our voice is being heard in Georgia. It's a fight. Our voice must be heard in New York, and that's still a fight. That's my perspective. Share your perspective with somebody else. Daren Jaime saying, take care. God bless. We'll catch you next week with a brand new episode.
This ain't radio.